Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Judy Shanley with the National Center for Mobility Management at Easter Seals in Chicago, Illinois. And I've had the pleasure over this past few months to work with a group of transition professionals from the state of Maryland who have been really amazing in their focus on transportation and mobility. You just heard a little about the program. We called it Project Right, Raising Independence Through Transportation Education. And now I'd like you to have an opportunity to hear from some of the participants, some of the transition professionals who participated in that program. And in their own words, we're going to have a conversation about why transportation and mobility is important. So I'll introduce Laura. Laura, if you introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little about your role and why this is important.
Hi, I'm Laura Filer. I'm a transition resource itinerant with Harford County Public Schools. I am also the mom of a middle schooler with Down syndrome, so I oftentimes have that lens as well, the lens of a parent. And when I consider transportation and mobility and its importance, to me, it is that one component that brings all of the work that we do as transition professionals and as special educators together. So it really allows our students to completely kind of come full circle in terms of their transition to adulthood, and it gives them that tool for true full independence.
Thank you, Laura. It's been such a joy to work with you. Thank you for your participation. And now, Betsy, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Betsy Tornquist, and I'm the Secondary Transition Project Coordinator for the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education, and I'm on the Secondary Transition team at the Maryland State Department of Education. And I've been really interested. I've been in this field for 25 years, and I remember travel training students and riding behind buses. And for all of these years, transportation has always been identified as an area that we need to improve on in order for our students to be able to be independent with work and with school and with just living in their communities. So I'm excited to work with you all to try to help figure out some ways to infuse transportation education into the classroom so more students can have access to it.
Terrific. Thank you, Betsy. And Paul, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Paul Riley. I'm the transition specialist with Calvert County Public Schools in Maryland. And I also work with Betsy at the Maryland State Department of Education in the transition role there as well, and partnering up with her with issues related to transportation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I also just want to add that I think transportation is important because it is kind of the highway to independence for many of our students. So that really is an important role and part of what we do with our partnerships with our schools and with agencies and with our other departments in the public school system.
Wonderful. It is really about partnerships. It's about partnerships with non-traditional kinds of school partners and thinking about transportation as part of the team that really focuses on post-school outcomes for youth. So Laura, in your introduction, you mentioned that you're a parent as well. So tell us a little about as a family member, as a parent, why is it important to have your son or daughter know about mobility and transportation?
You know, I think the big key is that he wants to be independent and he doesn't want to rely upon me. And he's 11 going on 12, or I should say 11 going on 18, even as it is. You know, he has this real strong sense of who he is and what he wants to do. And I think in my journey of being a parent of a child with special needs, sometimes I feel that I always have to think 10 years down the road. What am I doing now to prepare for my son when he turns 21? And to be honest, I think initially I think about all the independent living skills in terms of his academic skills, his social skills, his work skills, but I hadn't really consciously thought about what am I doing now at this age to prepare him to be independent, you know, in his travel. And, you know, he can have many skills that make him a great employee, you know, a coworker, a good neighbor, a good friend, a good partner. But if he doesn't have the ability and the confidence to be able to move himself where he wants to go independently, then he's always going to be reliant upon me and my husband to get him to those places. And it made me think about the fact that he's not going to want that. And what I need to do is start now while he's younger in building that independence in him in baby steps. And then really also, frankly, preparing myself, because a part of that, the letting go, is the scary part of letting go. And, it was something that I hadn't really consciously thought of. And now I feel like it's all I think about.
Wonderful. That's so true. We talk to many families who, the student has taken a yellow school bus, or the family has driven them for years and years in school. And now the thought of them traveling independently on some other mode of transportation is a really scary thing. And it's also what we've, in our work with school districts around the country over these last years, when we think about independent skills, we think about job seeking skills and housing and living independently and social kind of skills, but we often don't think about travel and mobility. So excited that Maryland has taken such an interest. Betsy, why is that? You're representing the State Department. Why should a State Department of Education be interested in this in a systemic kind of way?
Yeah, like I said, this is something that we've been thinking about and talking about in Maryland for a long time. We have a steering committee that has a transition coordinator identified from each of our local school systems, and we meet quarterly. And transportation has been an issue that it's come up over and over again for the past few years since I've been on board. And we form work groups to kind of dig down deep on certain issues. And we formed a transportation work group. And I started sort of purposefully looking for opportunities to learn more about transportation education and transportation and mobility. And that's how I met you, Judy. I was going to every presentation that you did and taking my notes and bringing them back to our steering committee. And we had the opportunity to connect on another issue that was happening in Maryland. And we started talking about how we could get this down to our local school systems. The teachers in local school systems have so much on their plate. So as a State Department, if we can help identify resources and make it easier for them to be able to put this in place with their students, then we should be helping them, because we know it's something that is across the board in our rural areas, in our urban areas, in our suburban areas. Every place that there are students, transportation poses issues. So that's why I think that from the State Department level, working together with you, Judy, to do this pilot and hopefully roll out these resources across the state will just make for better outcomes for all of our students.
One thing, we hear sometimes that transportation is not an issue in urban areas, and we know that's not true. That
Right.
Students have similar mobility needs, whether they live in urban, suburban, or rural areas. So
Yeah, that's what we hear.
the first time you and I connected, one of the first times had to do with, I remember the Maryland Department of Education has some transition materials that they develop for families, and it was quite outdated. So we had worked together to update those materials so that families had and transition professionals had current information. And I think that's one of the things I've learned doing this work for a number of years, is that you need to keep the information current and relevant so that teachers get the best information that they possibly can. So Paul, you mentioned this is about partnerships. And one thing that you have impressed me immensely because of the partnerships that you've established in doing this work over the last few months. Can you talk a little about those partnerships?
Sure. And actually, those partnerships have been established really out of necessity. We were trying to get our students out into the community, and we were dependent on our bus system in the school, but also with other departments. For example, our student services, our legal and contracts department, because there are a lot of hurdles that are in place, for legal reasons. There are rules and regulations for keeping families and students safe, but they can also act as impediments to getting students out in the jobs and in the workforce, or even to work-based learning experiences. So it was really necessary to set up partnerships with transportation department and other departments in order to get some things really going. And we're a suburb of DC, but we're more of a rural county, more spread out. So we have a few town centers kind of spread out, but transportation is just necessary to get kids out in the community and get those experiences for them.
One thing that I remember when we had a meeting with your pupil transportation director and yourself, he actually was helpful in bringing in planning organizations. So community planning organizations, the agencies, the organizations that actually design service, because those entities need to know about the kind of travel needs and travel patterns for students. If they're not having conversations with school districts and school professionals, they're never going to know that they potentially can change a route to accommodate a student, or can add additional service if there's not a service, as long as it doesn't, you mentioned the rules that exist between public transportation and school transportation, as long as those changes in route service don't violate any of the rules specific to public transportation, then it's okay. Students can use public transportation. I was working with a school district in California, and the pupil transportation director of that school district always thought of himself as part of an IEP team, as part of a transition team, that he could influence the post-school travel for students. He knew about how that student traveled on the bus. He knew their independent mobility. He knew their choices that they made when riding on a yellow school bus that then could be applied to a public bus setting. So you're exactly right that pupil transportation director is really critical. What else? But Laura, have you found anything surprising in this work? Has anything, I know we have the online materials. I know you've been going through them. They're really focusing on all aspects of transportation education. Is there anything that has surprised you in this process?
I think just the sheer amount of partners that are available. And I think the sheer amount of resources that are out there that we just need to connect with and connect together. So that's, I always love hearing people who are very passionate about what they do. And it makes me feel so grateful to be surrounded by passionate people, because it's that passion that really moves things forward. And when you see so many passionate people, and they each have their own niche, and you see it coming together. But it really shows me that it's very much kind of an individualized, I would say individualized partnership, but for lack of a better word, like Paul was saying down in Calvert County, that his county's needs are different than, let's say, Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and Harford County. And just realizing that there are, even in your local area, so many people who are just as passionate, and to connect with them and look at what we can do together in our local community. That's really surprised me. And not so much even surprising, but the other thing that I think is really powerful when we think about families and connecting families is hearing from students who have benefited from transportation education, and hearing from young men and young women talking about how much having that independence has transformed their lives. Because I think sometimes, we can imagine what our children will be like as young adults, and we can and imagine and worry about the pitfalls and the growing pains. But when we had the one young man in the one module just talking about how he felt empowered, it really makes you stop and think, and it really fuels the work on just that student level, that person level. So those are probably the two things that really struck me the most in the work we've been doing together.
Yeah, the resource piece, it can become overwhelming. And so
Mhm.
that's why I think the focus on this has really been trying to integrate a lot of the content and topical content in to your day-to-day role as a transition professional, as an educator. The story that you recalled about the student, he was a student from Chicago Public Schools, and he talked about spontaneous choice. So he could travel independently, so he didn't have to rely on his mom and dad to take him places. He could go to the movies with friends. He could get his job and go to college and participate independently. And it's all about spontaneity. So thanks for recalling that. That was a really moving, that was really important in my understanding of how important this is. So thank you for recounting that. Betsy, data. You know, we were very privileged to have Dr. Valerie Mazzotti in one of our touch base meetings talking about the need for data, both to inform the need for transportation and mobility education, as well as some sort of method or system for collecting data regarding the impact of this work. Can you talk a little about the importance of data in this whole topic of transportation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like we said, this has been something that's been talked about, that we need to do better with transportation, and but we don't have data collected. We don't know how many students have lost a job because they couldn't get there. We did start this process by doing a survey to our local school systems, just to sort of find out what they're using for public transportation, and what things that they need. And we asked if they were doing travel training. And we were happy to see that I think 60% of the people who responded said, yes, we do travel training. And I think about the same amount said, yes, we do put travel training activities on the student's transition plan in their IEP. But then when we asked further to clarify more, we see that it's for students who are in community work programs or community-based programs, that it's not happening for students, in all, it's not happening for students across the board. We're doing a good job with some students in some pockets and some programs, but we're not doing a great job across the board. And we need to figure out a way to start collecting that data to show that it's an area of need, and also to see how putting into place these new practices, how it improves those areas. And it's interesting, to piggyback on what Laura was saying, another one of the questions that we asked was, what is stopping this from happening in schools? And the responses were a lot about knowledge, like not knowing what was available, fear, and those partnerships. I've been so impressed with the local transit agencies and the local planning boards, that they really want to work with us, and they really are willing to partner. And I don't think that teachers or anyone in the school systems knew that was available. So I think we need to continue to work on how we collect data and what data to collect, and the ways to do it, because it is such important work, and it needs to be represented in a way that can be shared.
I know you and I have had conversations about indicator 14, the post-school outcome data, the OSEP indicator data, and I don't know of any states that collect data regarding how transportation affects students' ability to get a job or go to college or be engaged in an activity 1 year post high school. And so I think you're exactly right. We've really got to focus on trying to find that connection, that predictor. We know anecdotally that transportation is a challenge, but having those data really confirm it. You talked about the partnerships that transit and planning organizations want to establish partnerships with school districts. The work that I do nationally is called mobility management, and that's building coordinated systems across states. And too infrequently, when I'm looking at these systems, you've got a lot of nonprofit organizations, governmental agencies, transit providers. School districts are rarely involved. So it's creating an opportunity for school districts to be at the table to influence in the kinds of services that are available. So thank you for the data piece. I think that's really, really critical. So, Paul, what else? What surprised you about this process? Anything that has struck you that you think that other educators and transition professionals would benefit from knowing?
Well, I think Betsy hit the nail on the head when she talked about whether we put transportation in transition plans, and a lot of us don't. I know even in the rural counties where that is a big need, we just figure, oh, there's nothing we can really do about it. But what happened in a particular case was that I happened to be working with a student who was actually interested in infrastructure and wanted to work at the county transportation office. Well, that kind of pushed me to go ahead and establish a relationship with Sandy with Calvert County Transportation. And it helped me to recognize the fact that they were really open to working with us. And that really opened my eyes to the fact that we kind of have in our heads that there are certain structures in place and we can't do anything about it. But once you establish the relationships with the people in those positions, Sandy was willing to work with us. And actually, even though this particular student could drive, she said, you know, I'm willing to take this student and others on transportation route and see how the system works
Wow.
using a pass that they can go on. And I mean, it just opened up a whole new world for us that I can pass on to teachers and say, you know what, if we've got students that need this, let's start putting it on their IEPs and offering this training and this help, which the county is providing, which we just weren't aware of prior to that.
That's amazing. And the point that you raised about students going into careers in transportation is equally as important. I think the transportation industry lacks diversity sometimes in terms of thinking about individuals with disabilities for professions and careers. And so the fact that your students are both learning to travel independently, but also learning about careers in transportation industry is amazing. So thank you for that. We have just a couple minutes left. I want to give you all an opportunity for any final thoughts, any ahas and words of wisdom that you've learned that you want to share with our audience. Laura?
I was really thinking of two things. Throughout the work that we've done together, we've talked about family summits and transportation summits and how important it is to have this conversation with the community at large. And I like the idea of starting with families and connecting with families and then moving to a transportation summit, or even if your school system already has some sort of an event that brings the community together, to be able to use that as a good platform to come in and begin the conversation about transportation education. And the second thing, from also from a parent perspective, I always like to say everything is better with connection. So anything in life that's a struggle or a fear, knowing that you're not alone is really it takes away a lot of that fear. It takes away a lot of that anxiety. And I think by connecting families, not only with resources, but I think also connecting families with each other. And, maybe families that are a few years down the road, families who are many years down the road, that can kind of show what that path looks like and talk about what worked and what didn't. And then just helping families realize that as this is a very big jump for us as parents, because it is really, that dream that we have of our children living these rich, full, independent adult lives also comes with kind of that risk, with that saying, go forth and figure this out and let's do this together. But it really requires that kind of careful planning. And I think by having other families who've gone before you to help you move forward together makes a big difference.
Wow, terrific point. We've helped communities and school districts set up mentoring programs between, just as you said, parents whose students are traveling independently and pair them with parents whose children will travel. Unfortunately, COVID has created a lot of different kinds of opportunities for us this year. Typically, we would do that in the course of this transportation education work we do. It's an important piece. And so hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to do that again. But thank you. Betsy, final thoughts.
Well, I was thinking kind of along the lines with COVID is that I'm so impressed with these pilot participants. There's even more that they have to deal with now during COVID when you're coming, some students are in, some students are out. You don't know from day to day what's happening. And for you all and your other colleagues who are participating in this pilot to be viewing the modules and participating in the discussions and thinking about ways that you can infuse transportation education into your work. It makes me very hopeful that we can it's just the tip of the iceberg, that when things get a little more normal and we can continue this and expand it beyond the 4 school systems that are participating now. But for you all to have done as much as you've done during this time when you have so many extra things on your plate, I'm so hopeful that how we can continue this going forward.
Oh boy, couldn't agree with you more. Amazing group of professionals. And yes, I'm looking forward to the future. And Paul, final thoughts.
So I would say ask questions, talk to people, because as educators, we're not the experts in transportation and in other fields, but in securing jobs and positions for students, I often come in contact with people and I don't have to play dumb. I'm just sometimes just dumb about other professions. And I'm just like, we've got a kid who's interested in getting from here to there. Let me talk to this transportation department about it. Or in the case of the county transportation, just asking questions and establishing relationships just goes a long way to serving our students and their families.
Terrific. Well, thank you all so much for your time. You've all been very candid and really eye-opening. And so I appreciate your time and your participation. I've gotten and really enjoyed getting to know you over these last few months and look forward to our continued work together. And we'll close the video portion of our presentation, and we're available to answer any questions that you as an audience might have. So thank you, everybody.